trying to keep up with Chad.
The host will be informed that you would like to speak.
Great. Are you kidding me?
Yes, Meg, do you see the hand raise with someone on the phone with a 514 area code?
Right now, it's there. I lost Zoom completely, so I'm really relieved you're still
That
here.
would be me.
I see a hand raised. Is that a question? What is that? 514.
Yeah, if they're on the phone, they have to hit *6, I believe, to be able to unmute. But maybe...
Somebody is asking how to get a video to show to
You have been muted by the meeting host and cannot unmute yourself.
It would be great.
The host has to unmute
Put
me.
in. Someone asked, will the chat be saved?
I think you can save the chat if you go to where you're typing in the chat
At
and you
least,
hear
they got
there's
the
3 little dots. I
notification.
think you can save
The host would
chat
like you to
for yourself
unmute your
on
microphone.
computer.
You can press *6 to
514,
unmute.
are you trying to ask a question?
You are
would need
unmuted.
to unmute to do that. Oh,
Yeah.
you're not allowed to. There. Wait, it's screen receiver.
Yes, I'm unmuted.
Hello?
Hello?
Yeah.
Yes, I have a question for the UUA Board of Trustees.
Could you identify yourself, please, since we can't see your name or anything?
Yes, I'm Robin Edgar. I'm calling from Montreal. I want to
You
ask...
are muted.
Okay.
I'm muted. So much for that. So they muted me.
Right. Any other questions?
Goodbye. Please enter your destination number now.
I should have just asked the fucking question. Well, I should have just bypassed it completely. But that's it. They muted me again. They keep doing it. They keep silencing me. They don't want me to ask questions about the cover-up and denial of sexual abuse of children committed by Unitarian Universalist ministers and Unitarian Universalist Sunday school teachers who are known as religious educators. I was just going to ask, when is the board going to apologize for brazenly lying about child sex abuse in the middle of the so-called official apology for clergy sexual misconduct that UUA moderator Jim Key inserted into the middle of his first moderator's report to a UUA GA in 2014. And I was also hoping to ask when the UUA Board of Trustees will ensure that the UUA formally withdraws the false accusation of blasphemous libel that it brought against me in 2012 in an effort to intimidate me to taking down blog posts that tell the readily verifiable truth about what the Unitarian Universalist Association's Canadian attorney, Stikeman Elliott Barristers and Solicitors defamation lawyer, Maitre Marc-Andre Coulombe, quite aptly described as such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape. So yes, that happened in June of 2012. I initially received an email, and then I later went to a bailiff's office to get the actual paper document, and amongst other quite ludicrous accusations, the last accusation in that cease and desist demand letter said, your unfounded and vicious allegations to the effect that ministers of the association engage in such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape are defamatory. And then it went on to say that they are so defamatory that they constitute blasphemous libel. Blasphemous libel is a criminal act that was in the Canadian Criminal Code up until, I think, 2018, when it was repealed. But at the time, in 2012, it was still in the Canadian Criminal Code. And so essentially what happened is that the Unitarian Universalist Association hired a Canadian defamation lawyer to falsely accuse me of violating Canada's blasphemy law for making very truthful blog posts about Unitarian Universalists who were in fact charged, tried, and convicted of pedophilia and or rape. Namely Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell, who was convicted of raping at least one teenage Tibetan refugee who he lured away from her home in India with promises of a better life in America. He essentially told her parents that he would take her and be her guardian, and that he would make sure that she got a good education, and maybe possibly even become an American citizen, and so on and so forth, if they gave her into his care. She was 16 at the time, I believe, and he proceeded to use her as a sex slave for a number of years. In fact, I don't think she escaped his clutches until she was in her early 20s. So, basically several years of being this Unitarian Universalist minister's sex slave. She finally did break free from him, and she reported him to the police. Well, actually, she initially spoke to church members. It was actually church members, the Northborough or Westborough congregations in Massachusetts. It was actually, she first confided in church members, and some of them, not all of them by the way, some of them thought the best thing to do was to report this to the police. And it was indeed the best thing to do, because otherwise they would have covered it up. And so it was reported to the police, and eventually Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell was convicted of the rape of Funi Meston. And there were some other victims, but they didn't testify. But she, according to the reports, Funi Meston was the one who, went to court and testified and so on. A couple of others didn't, and who knows how many other victims there were. And then there's the case of Richard Buell, who is not a Unitarian Universalist minister. He's actually a Unitarian Universalist layperson, albeit a quite prominent one, from Reverend Dr. Victoria Weinstein's First Parish Norwell congregation. And I had blogged about him because Reverend Dr. Victoria Weinstein had tried to conceal the fact that she had a pedophile rapist in her congregation. She was stridently attacking the Roman Catholic Church over a comparatively minor sexual abuse of children on her blog, on her Peace Bank blog. And then I chimed in and said, well, what about Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell and, the other Unitarian Universalist ministers who are guilty of pedophilia and rape and so on? And she kept deleting my comments. So at the time, I didn't know who she was, by the way. I should mention that. She was pseudonymous under Peace Bang. I didn't know which Unitarian Universalist minister was Peace Bang. But after that episode, I decided to try and identify her and out her. And I was able to do so. I won't go into all the details, but it wasn't actually that difficult to find out who Peace Bang was, and it turned out to be Reverend Dr. Victoria Weinstein. And, that's that. I blogged about actually what happened is, once I knew it was Reverend Weinstein, or in the process of trying to determine it was Reverend Weinstein, I went to the First Parish Norwell newsletter, The Spire, and it just so happened that there was a notice about a meeting about the recent conviction of one Richard Buell, and that Reverend Deborah Pope Lance was presiding over this meeting regarding his conviction. And I knew that Reverend Deborah Pope Lance was a Unitarian Universalist minister who dealt with clergy sexual misconduct issues. So I initially thought it was perhaps another minister who had been convicted of some sort of sex crime, but it turned out to be a parishioner, not a minister, albeit, as I said, a prominent member of the church. And, I found newspaper reports and this and that, so I blogged about Richard Buell. So it was really only Richard Buell and Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell that I blogged about, although I was aware of other cases. I chose to be cautious and blog only about those cases where people had been charged, tried, and convicted of such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape, so as to avoid being accused of slander and libel and so on and so forth. There are other cases I'm aware of, including other cases where ministers were convicted of pedophilia or rape. Also, Unitarian Universalist religious educators who were convicted of rape of preteen children. So I do know of other cases, but at that time I hadn't blogged about them. Some of them I didn't even know about at that time, although others I did. And a recent case, a comparatively recent case, is Reverend Ronald Eugene Robinson, who was convicted of child porn charges. And it wasn't sort of ordinary run-of-the-mill child porn stuff. He was actually in a live stream thing where a child was being abused, in a live stream, quite seriously abused from what I understand. And apparently in this live stream, Reverend Ronald Eugene Robinson, a very Christian Unitarian Universalist minister, by the way. He identified as a Christian Unitarian Universalist minister. It's my understanding that he was fantasizing about raping and murdering children. So, pretty serious child sex abuse stuff. And the UUA has been trying to keep it hidden in various ways, including brazenly lying about child sex abuse in the UUA Moderators Report of 2014. Jim Key, at the time, was the UUA moderator. He'd been elected the year before, so it was his first Moderators Report. And I had been in contact with Jim Key about the blasphemous libel accusation. I was hoping that he would do what was necessary to have it formally withdrawn and properly apologized for, and to tell the truth about sexual abuse of children by Unitarian Universalist ministers and Unitarian Universalist Sunday school teachers, religious educators. I even had a phone conversation with him, a fairly long one. But he broke off communication, and it became clear to me that he could not be relied upon to do the right thing. And so when it came to my attention, that the board was going to deliver an apology for clergy sexual misconduct, I actually contacted Reverend Gail Seavey, Reverend Deborah Pope Lance, possibly some other advocates for clergy misconduct victims, and said, hey, look, I have a feeling that this apology, isn't really going to be up to scratch, and you really should vet it. I would suggest vetting the apology, ask Jim to provide it to you first so you can vet it and approve it. Apparently that didn't happen because in this apology he minimized the extent and seriousness of clergy sexual misconduct in general. He said it was only a few ministers, when in fact there's hundreds of Unitarian Universalist congregations that have been affected by clergy sexual misconduct of one kind or another. He characterized it as mainly, ministers making inappropriate sexual advances on congregants or having affairs with congregants' wives and so on, which is one form, and it may be the main form of clergy sexual misconduct, but believe me, there's worse stuff than that, which was not mentioned in the apology. But when it came to the sexual abuse of children, not only did he not in any way apologize for sexual abuse of children, he said, and I'm trying to remember his exact words, I think there's something along the lines of, there was no abuse of elders or children in my investigations. I'm pretty sure that's an exact quote, or close to exact quote, from the so-called apology for clergy sexual misconduct of the UUA Board of Trustees that not Reverend, because he's not a Reverend, he's a layperson. He is a risk management consultant, by the way, so I guess he was, using his risk management skills here in his worthless apology. But it wasn't just his apology. This was an official UUA board apology, so they're all part of it. They're all complicit. And he literally denied any sexual abuse of children by Unitarian Universalist ministers, or at least claimed that he couldn't find any in his investigations. However, I had told him about Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell's rape of a teenage Tibetan refugee or two or three. I had told him about one or two other cases I was aware of. There were a few things I didn't tell him about. There was a case of a Unitarian Universalist minister who was convicted of molesting very young children that I didn't actually bring up. I've held a few things in reserve. So he knew perfectly well in terms of what I told him, and I can't imagine he wasn't told of sexual abuse of children by, let's say, Reverend Gail Seavey or Reverend Deborah Pope Lance. And yet, in this apology, which again, it wasn't just his apology, this was a official apology of the UUA Board of Trustees delivered during a General Assembly of the Unitarian Universalist Association in 2014, he denied any sexual abuse of children, or at least denied being aware of any sexual abuse of children, claimed he investigated and found nothing. Well, I don't know, I would have thought my communications with him, which also included some emails, were part of his investigations, and I told him about Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell. So, yeah, I'd say it was just a brazen, bald-faced lie. And so here we are. I tried to bring up this issue with the UUA board. They're well aware of it. I've sent them emails. I've left phone messages. But I hope to bring it up in this open house and see what happens. I'm regretting not just going ahead and asking the question, but for all I know, I was muted even before, although I suspect I wasn't. Anyway, they heard from me. They got my name. They heard my name. I'm pretty sure the board members know what it was about. I'm pretty sure Susan Frederick Gray knows what it's about. I'm going to put this video on YouTube, and I'm going to put it up there, and they can listen to it. They can watch it. And we will be in touch with the UUA Board of Trustees and Reverend Susan Frederick Gray and other top-level UUA leaders, such as Carrie McDonald, the Executive Vice President of the Unitarian Universalist Association. Notice how I put the accent on vice there. Prior to Carrie, it was Kathleen K. Montgomery, who was the Executive Vice President of the UUA for more than 30 years, if I have the numbers correct, certainly for the better part of 3 decades, if not a bit longer. And Kathleen K. Montgomery was behind the false accusation of blasphemous libel because she handles all the legal stuff for the UUA, as does Carrie McDonald, I presume. But the role of the executive vice president of the UUA, amongst other things, is to coordinate the legal counsel of the Unitarian Universalist Association. I believe that's an exact quote, or close to exact quote, from the job description of Kathleen K. Montgomery, if not Carrie McDonald. So they've had phone calls from me, even some quite recent ones within the last month or so. They've had emails. I've tweeted about it. I've blogged about it. You know, they know about the blog posts and tweets. Looks like we're almost at the end of a 17-minute clip here, so we're going to wrap it up. But yes, I will be uploading this to YouTube, and I will certainly be in touch with the UUA Board of Trustees, and I will not be happy about being muted and silenced once again by the UUA Board of Trustees and the UUA more generally. That's it for now.